All right, here's our fourth unit, the Progressive Reform Era, which is going to be linked up to many of the concepts and ideas in our Populist Movement, Unit 2, the Ocala demands there starting in about the year 1890, and the Populist Revolt, and the William Jennings Bryan candidacy for the presidency with populist ideas and as a representative of the Democratic Party, challenging the Republicans, big business, big industry, corruption, all that kind of thing. It has some impact. Not hugely so, but it has impact enough that the ideas don't go away, and it's still there. The stress from the Industrial Revolution is getting greater and more significant, and it's going to transfer itself into the progressive movement that's going to last all the way till about 1920, and the things that happen here are going to result in some success and some reform, but not all of it's going to completely reform the system. It's going to kind of die away in terms of real practice, and eventually it's going to come back in terms of the New Deal because of our Great Depression here. Comparing and contrasting progressives and populists is important here. Should be able to do that in these three categories. Associating what progressive is with maybe real-world things. First of all, you might think of synonymous terms: advance, improve, fix, adjust, change, move forward, reform. What this is going to result in, as I mentioned before, we've got the farmers who are planting the seeds of reform. Note he's planting seeds here. I think that's pretty funny. We are going to be planting more seeds, and the seeds are going to be growing, and the ideas are going to expand here, and there's going to be people challenging government to go ahead and make some changes and reforms so that government is serving the country, serving society, doing something to improve the economy, doing something to improve politics and democracy here. It's all going to lead to and pushing us closer to government regulation, increased regulation of the economy, and involvement in life. Laissez-faire capitalism is getting picked away at here a little bit. And we saw here with populism, we've got all these different things and ideas and events that were kind of behind it. We have these things as part of that progressive movement that are very much linked to everything here the populists were talking about. All these particular issues still around today in some level or sense. There's going to be a lot of change in a lot of these that are going to become reality, but there's going to be also some areas where the reforms and the progress in society, politically, economically, socially, isn't going to happen for everybody, and we'll see that a little bit later. If you look at the role of government in the economy and society again, in the 19th century and early 20th century, you have to answer that this is a government that's supposed to be hands-off, let the people do as they please. But again, it's moving away from that. It's also important to understand, again, to review our isms here a little bit: communism, socialism, and progressives, and what they are and what they are not. Our communists, as we talked about before, an economic concept and ideology, basically is a concept and ideology that's coming out of the problems that the Industrial Revolution is developing, and that there is an elite, wealthy class that pretty much owns everything, and it'll never be even, it'll never be fixed, it'll never be reformed, because big business, industry, those that have money are bribing those in government, and thus the people, the slaves, the proletariat, are always going to suffer. So therefore we have to have a violent revolution of the people, and we have to have everything owned by government. All right? Our socialists, like the Socialist Party, is going to pop up here. Eugene V. Debs, who was a leader of one of our key railroad unions early on, around the time of the Great Railroad Strike. They're also concerned for what's going on and want society served and the problems of the economy fixed by government, but they're not into all resources being owned and controlled by industry. They're all about probably maybe controlling some of the key ones, and as we know, the railroads were, like from the Granger point of view, the ones that should be controlled most significantly, because everybody utilizes the railroads. For the good of everybody, not for private profit. And our progressives also recognize that there are some severe problems out there, but they reject any ownership of resources, production of goods by government. They want to reform the system. Regulate would be the key term here. You want to add, make sure you add that, regulate things so that it is improved. They don't want to tear down the house and destroy it over here on the left. They don't even want to significantly modify it. They want to improve upon it, and they want to stay true to the ideal of private property, private ownership of goods and resources, and buying and selling of things. And let's put some rules on how people play the game, you might say. Put up some rules for corruption, put up some rules for industry, so that the level playing field is a little more fair. Right? Goals and beliefs. Goals and beliefs, what the progressive movement is and isn't. It's not a single unified movement, but there are 4 categories of reform that we see. Social reform, moral reform, economic reform, political reform. By and large, progressives felt that government should be more accountable to the citizens. It should be more in a serving mode, not just in the matter of, just function in the matter of what Jefferson would have said, provide for a common defense and maintain some sort of continuity between the states, that kind of thing. But also curb the power and influence of the wealthy that take advantage of the not wealthy or the not powerful. It should have the powers necessary to improve the lives of people, expanded powers. Use the loose construction necessary and proper clause in Congress's section of the Constitution to do that. That way, life in the country, the government, and the way things operate in all these categories are going to be more efficient, and government itself should be more efficient and less corrupt. Who are the key movers in all of this? Some of the key movers in the progressive movement that are really driving information home to the people and to government officials as well. Some influential ones coming up are writers and journalists. They are in a mass communication type society that's developing here, talking about and writing about the problems, writing books about the problems that are there. Jacob Riis, for example, up in Sinclair here, writing The Jungle about the meatpacking plants and the conditions of workers, and then also thereby talking about how bad the meat processing setup is there and how bad it is for people. Gets people very agitated and very well informed enough so that they put pressure on government to make a change. And they're really our first investigative, early day investigative reporters. Their goal, again, is to inform and anger the public to put pressure on government to do something. Roosevelt really didn't like most of these individuals. He was an ultra-patriot. He is an ultra-patriot that kind of says, there's a lot more good of America. All the bad is being talked about. He gave them the nickname muckrakers. And they shouldn't be just reporting everything that's wrong. It's not good. It's not healthy to have that kind of thing. They don't report the good things that are going on with America. But there are some significant problems that we've seen with our Industrial Revolution unit. Industry has a significant number of monopolies. There are and have been some laws passed like the antitrust acts that we've talked about recently that are supposed to break them apart, but they're not well enforced. Wages are really not going up. Living costs are going up, but wages are not. People work immense hours and days of the week. Workers are really having no rights, no power. Unions are being stomped on, and even outlawed, and you have force applied to them to prevent them from going on strike. There's way too many workers. Kids are working to support the family, and they're not going to school. Our cities are overpopulated. Poverty. Nearly half the population is in a really bad state, in a bad condition. Corruption in government, political machines, all that kind of thing. The spoil system, even though we have the Pendleton Service Act passed at this point in time, it's not seemingly enough to really deal with all the issues out there. In fact, the spoil system is still going on very strongly at the state level of government. The federal government has some restrictions and some rules for who gets a job with the Pendleton Civil Service Act. So when we look at government's role before 1900, by and large, again, the law of nature rules everything. You're not responsible, as the government as an entity wasn't responsible for people's individual welfare other than protecting the country from invasion. Rugged individualism is kind of the idea behind things here, although it's a term that's really going to be coined and pushed by a future 1920s president. And survival of the fittest is pretty much it. You reap what you sow, and it's your work and your labor and your sweat and your natural God-given abilities. We talked about with social Darwinism kind of thing. This all mixed in with laissez-faire, again, kind of results in what we see here and what we talked about here with the powerful getting more powerful and the weak getting weak and weaker and weaker. And if we help people individually, it's going to kill their self-worth and their motivation to do anything. Now, enter our presidents. This particular individual is at the top, probably the most important individual in terms of progressive presidents we have. The first modern-day president, going to be really the first modern-day hero, a well-known name. The Roosevelt family was a wealthy name from New York. But when he becomes president, he's going to push something that most presidents were not, and that was be a president of action, be strong, use the presidency to make positive change. That wasn't the norm for presidents. Usually, again, it's laissez-faire, hands off, and that's about it. Government's not is responsible for the people's welfare. However, he adds to the equation, or keeps in the equation, that it's also the government's job to make sure that industry is promoted. Both need each other. All right. So he's a different kind of Republican, but he's more moderate and he's reform-minded. The progressives, all three of these presidents, Howard Taft that comes after Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, all fear that the conditions are possibly going to result in revolution, right? That communism concept and idea is out there, and if something isn't done, some reform doesn't happen, then there is going to be some violence, and of course the violence is seen in all these labor union strikes of the 1890s especially. And so these presidents are of the mindset, fix it, don't scrap it. In all this, the power of government will increase, and they're trying to avert a disaster with this. All right, and looking at where people are in terms of the political spectrum, the right and the left, we have Republicans, and this guy Wilson, however, is going to be a Democrat. He's a little bit in the wrong spot here. He's a Democrat. He's going to be a little more on this side of things here in terms of regulating and moving things into government power to regulate the economy and regulate politics and things of that nature. But by and large, we have these people on this side of the spectrum here in communism. Way over to the left, government ownership, we're really over here. Our Democrats really actually should be over here. This would be a little bit more of a better explanation of things. This is a little bit too extreme, at least for most people, I think. All right. So Teddy Roosevelt is our first progressive president. He is of national fame and comes to national fame because of our Spanish-American War. We'll talk about here in a little while. Next unit, he is going to be catapulted to higher positions in office because of that. But he has always been part of serving in public service all of his life, and he was brought up to be in that mindset. He served as New York Chief of Police, where he cleaned up corruption, made sure that police officers were doing their job, actually went out in the streets and tried to make sure that people were actually on the job, fired them on the spot if they weren't, made sure they had all the same guns, gave them a uniform policy, all these codes of ethics, that kind of thing. He served in the New York House of Representatives, then later on as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy when the Spanish-American War broke out. And when the war broke out and we win the war, then he became governor of New York. And in all those levels, and especially at the level of governor of New York and House of Representatives, but he's the governor of New York, he started attacking the political machines. And the political machine actually, like every other politician out there, helped put him and other politicians in office. But he's a different individual in that he is very ideologically do the right thing minded kind of a guy, and he ticks these political machines off. And so as governor, he's kind of messing up things in New York for the political machines. And he is going to be dealt with by the political machine by trying to get rid of him in New York. And the way in which they get rid of him is to nominate him to become William McKinley's vice president in the year 1900 in that election that, again, William Jennings Bryan will run against those two individuals to try and take over the reform movement and drive the reform movement into the White House, but he's going to be put into the vice presidency with this election that McKinley wins. Now, this might sound like this is an advancement and an increase in power, but it's really not. Constitutionally, the vice president has one power, and that is to break a tie in the United States Senate, and otherwise he's never in the United States Senate. There is no other power given to the vice president at this point in time. It's just tradition that if the president dies, he will take over. And so this was political oblivion and a do-nothing kind of a position for Teddy Roosevelt, and the political machine kind of felt like they got rid of him. However, just not too long after the election is won and after Inauguration Day, President McKinley, again, as we mentioned before, is assassinated by a guy by the name of Kogels, and he's an anarchist and really says, I just don't believe that any one person should have so much power and in government and in control, and so he shoots him in the stomach, and McKinley dies a few days later. He's executed this individual, and Teddy Roosevelt is in the White House, and we have what several people at the time noted as a crazy man in the White House, because he wasn't somebody that could be bought, he wasn't somebody that could be controlled, he had his own mind, and he had this idea that I am going to do the right thing. And so what he has as a plan coming in, and this is kind of unique and new, not too recent past, that presidents have been coming in with little slogans and plans for what they were going to do in office. His plan is the square deal plan, and his goal is really, in his mind, to improve the life of the individual. And he's going to be serving out, most of William McKinley's term here. And if he had to, in this term, use force and legal action against business and industry to control monopolies, he would. Again, he's fearing that there could be a revolution here if this wasn't going to be dealt with. And you can kind of see this cartoon depicting him as literally a crazy man. He wasn't somebody that was going to do anything other than what he thought was the right thing. He's also a unique president in that he was an athlete. He was a cowboy out in North Dakota. After his first wife died, he went out there to kind of rehabilitate himself. As you see him dressed in his cowboy garb here, which is not the real cowboy garb, it's something kind of else, something kind of from the Eastern higher establishment. He was into wrestling. In fact, he was a severe asthmatic, and his father told him that if you're going to ever make something of yourself and have a life at all, you have to build yourself up, and so that's what he did. After his presidency and during his presidency, he was big into hunting, hunted everything you could possibly imagine, and he is also a president here that is going to be very big and very forceful on world affairs and the world scene, and is going to be a big trendsetter here. He's also a guy that's kind of considered to be influential in saving football. Around the turn of the century, massive numbers of deaths because of a lack of rules, just a very, very violent game. And right around the year 1905, in that area, there was a movement in Congress to ban the sport because it was so violent and resulting in so many deaths and nasty injuries. And Teddy Roosevelt wasn't going to have any part of that, and a few others that were out there that really loved the sport, of course. And they basically started establishing this commission to go ahead and make sure there's some rules that are set up. And we start to see the game modified. The introduction of the forward pass comes not too long after that, that kind of thing, so that it's not so violent and the game is kept. And so he's influential with that. But accomplishments as president, he attacks corruption. He goes after greater civil service reform at the higher level of government, the federal level of government, if you need to annotate that there. We know the Pendleton Civil Service Act is around, of course, yet, but he makes sure this is enforced. And he seeks to end the spoil system, the rewarding of jobs simply because of the fact that you helped somebody win an election, right? That patronage thing. And he's very much, again, an outdoorsman, an expert horse rider. In this particular cartoon, showing all the things that he's going after. He's leaping over to try and deal with, straighten things out. Here he's depicted as Daniel from the biblical story of Daniel in the lion's den, and all these lions are the nasty, evil, aggressive, meat-eating trusts and monopolies. And he is really the first president that goes after and breaks dozens of trusts using the Sherman Antitrust Act, which, as I mentioned before, was initially used primarily for and actually used against unions with the idea that unions were monopolizing their labor, and big business and industry kind of flipped the law against them, and the Supreme Court and courts often agreed with them on that. But he starts using the Sherman Antitrust Act more forcefully to try and regulate regulate monopolies and break up monopolies and such. And he also is influential in bringing about more forceful food regulation laws. Sinclair's The Jungle helps inform people of that. He read the book, and because of that, he's going to help pass the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. You'll read about that a little bit later. And this is a time period when there is, again, no rules and regulations for consumer goods. Consumer protection just isn't there. What you eat, if it kills you, too bad, so sad. It's caveat emptor, let the buyer beware kind of a scenario here. All kinds of patent medicines, and you don't know what was in it. Mostly alcohol usually, but sometimes cocaine and other strong drugs or chemicals and things like that. And they were supposed to cure everything from gout to cancer to constipation, you name it. One thing was supposed to cure everything. And a good example of that was that simple thing that we all know of, and that's Coca-Cola, that actually had small traces amounts of cocaine in it back in the later part of the 19th century. But Teddy Roosevelt's most enduring and most important, lasting
reform and change that he did for the public good was in the area of conservation. He was big into conserving and protecting public lands. 300 million acres of land was protected under him, 53 wildlife preserves. Doing that, he quite often bypassed Congress. Usually Congress was in charge of protecting land and setting up national parks like Yellowstone National Park, which was set up before Teddy Roosevelt, but he would just issue executive orders and just go ahead and protect it. Under his presidency, he establishes a new cabinet post called the Office of the Interior, still around today, and it was set up to measure, control the use of natural resources, and kind of measure it out so it's there for future generations to use, and it's not wasted and completely destroyed. So Teddy Roosevelt serves out his term, McKinley's 3 years of office, and he was going to start running for his own term in office, and the question came up, is if you win this election, are you going to run again? And he says, no, I'm not going to run again because that would be too close. I'm not going to take that. That's going to be too close to breaking George Washington's tradition. It won't be 8 years total, but it'll be 7. So if I run again, it would go beyond the 8. And so he says, I'm not going to do that. But he's going to regret that. He's going to later on wish that he never had said that. And again, this is his Dudley Do-Rightism that he kind of has here. And this particular cartoon kind of portrays that whole exchange of question and answer that he has over his term in office. But it's also a criticism, of him. I'm not going to run again in 1908. But it's a criticism of Teddy Roosevelt in that he is seen as a president that takes the presidency too far, does too much, depicted as a Julius Caesar here in Rome, an all-powerful emperor, for example, and he gets a lot of flack for that. But he definitely does expand the powers of the presidency. What he's done with his own term in office from 1904 to 1908, he selects his vice president to succeed him and run as the Republican nominee in the 1908 election, and that is William Taft. He's completely opposite. Teddy Roosevelt, very, very aggressive, highly energetic, probably slept about 4 hours a night. This guy discovered animals in South and Central America, insects, wrote books on things, botany, bugs, animals. He was a scientist. He was into everything. He's a very high energy person, very aggressive person. This guy, Taft, very laid back. Never really wants to be president, but since he's approached and kind of pushed, he's kind of a loyal party kind of guy, and he takes the position of running for the presidency in 1908 to be sworn in 1909. He's significant in that he actually breaks more trust in monopolies than Teddy Roosevelt, significantly more. However, he kind of irritates Teddy Roosevelt, and then he unprotects millions of acres of land and opens it up to industry to go ahead and develop it and to start getting after the resources there. He didn't really appoint progressives to his cabinet, kind of became the old line conservative Republican kind of individuals in his cabinet. He promised to lower tariffs, and Teddy Roosevelt is the one Republican that did lower tariffs, but he actually increased tariffs, which we know increases the price of goods overall for Americans in the country. And so that really irritates Teddy Roosevelt a lot. He hands over the position and the reins to him in 1908, but by the time 1912 comes around, he's very upset with how Taft has dealt with things, and after running around the world hunting every kind of animal in sight, he comes back and says, I'm going to run for the presidency. I'm going to run for that Republican ticket again. I'm going to take away from Taft. In fact, their friendship, which was pretty strong before, is pretty much deteriorated into nothing here now, and he seeks the Republican nomination for the presidency. And the Republican Party basically rejects it here, and you can kind of see here that the cartoon here is showing that the Republican Party and Teddy Roosevelt are splitting here with this, and there is still, though, a strong number of people in the country who really love Teddy because he spoke to the common people. He was very energetic. He engaged with people. He's from kind of an elite background, but he didn't speak that way. He didn't act that way, and of course he was out there attacking the trusts and attacking big business and doing things for the common people. And you'll read more about that when we start looking at some other events involving coal strikes and things like that. And so we have angry Republican progressives who love Teddy, who are going to join up with Democrats who, of course, hate the hardline conservative Republicans, and they're going to team up with a new party that's going to be formed here and try and oust the Republicans from the White House. Roosevelt criticizes Taft, and for all the things we just talked about, he comes back, as you can see here on the right, from Africa, and he's welcoming Uncle Sam. He's in the African continent, now he's back in North America. But he's going to call for, in this campaign, a new nationalism, right? And he is going to talk about business regulation, welfare laws, protection for children in the workplace and women, income and inheritance taxes. This is an attack against the rich, right? Voting reform, for example, a private ballot and restrictions on balloting and voting and making sure it's fair and square and all that kind of thing. And what this results in, since the Republican Party will not nominate him, he takes on a third-party position here, which is called the Progressive Party, but it'll get nicknamed the Bull Moose Party, and you're going to read a little story about why it becomes the Bull Moose Party. Read it. It's in your outline. Make sure you read it. He runs as a third party in this election, and he's going to draw significantly here from the Republican Party. All those people that love Teddy Roosevelt as a Republican are going to run with him. Progressive-minded Democrats kind of like him too as well, and this is going to have the effect of weakening the Republican Party. And here we can see the Republicans over here and the Democrats over here. There's a new political animal in the zoo. And the platform of the Bull Moose Party is also going to involve pushing for the opportunity to create, for example, a national vote or an initiative. Big term for you that you'll define a little bit later. That gives everybody the opportunity to vote on a particular thing nationwide, more expansion of democracy for people, the ability to set up recall elections if there is a senator or a House Republican or House representative of the House of Representatives doing a bad job. You can actually have another vote or election to vote them out, referendums to the people to let them vote on issues. In fact, actually the initiative was actually the idea that people could come up with their own laws and ideas and proposals for legislation. Doesn't matter who you are. If you get somebody to sponsor in Congress, it could happen. He does something that he hadn't done before, which is promote the idea of women's suffrage. This was a movement that's big at the time. Child labor, minimum wage. None of these things existed. Popular direct election of senators, expansion of democracy. This was a big deal. All right, lots of change and reform here. And he had a big showing, and he went around the country, and he got a lot of people enthused about what he was talking about here. However, it's not going to turn out into any kind of success for him in the Progressive Party. In fact, there's not just three political parties here. There is the Socialist Party that ran for the presidency here in 1912, and their candidate was Eugene V. Debs, who was a member of and a leader of that great railroad union behind the Great Railroad Strike back in the 1870s, and other union leadership here that was significant. So it's a four-way kind of a race here, and it's going to result in a loss for Taft, and it's going to be a big win for this Democrat, Woodrow Wilson, who's going to sweep the country. He also is going to pitch himself as a reformer as well, and the whole third-party concept. You can see where the progressives were kind of strong. A little bit in the north and east, but look at where the progressives were out in the west, like that populist movement. Split down the votes, and it made it possible for the Democrats to win. But this Woodrow Wilson fellow, he is also a reformer in the Democratic Party. And of course, the Democratic Party, we talked about before, with William Jennings Bryan, took on the reform ideas of the populists. Well, here it is. Woodrow Wilson is going to start reforming things too. Very religious individual, strict religious upbringing. That's going to tie into how he sees things. He wants to make things right. Humanitarian, believes in a strong president, was a reform governor from New Jersey. Opposed heavily though, against suffrage and the women's suffrage movement. But he's going to try and push for a lower tariff, stronger trust legislation, economic reform that we'll read about a little bit more that's going to be very, very significant, still around yet today. Assistance to farmers to give them more affordable loans and financing to help them with their economic problems. Fight business fraud. Laws protecting unions and co-ops and their right to exist. He's going to significantly make changes here as well, but he's also going to be our World War I president. And when World War I happens, all this reform power that he is going to be building up is going to really kind of fade away, and our attention is going to get focused into World War I, and it's going to kill progressivism. But there is going to be some progressive things that happen also because of World War I. Talk about those a little bit later. What we're going to be doing a little bit later in class is looking at our matrix here for 4.1. It's actually going to be relabeled 4.4. It's not due at the end of the hour, but we'll work on it a little bit later that details some more of the things that the progressive presents do, and we'll be doing a little bit of mind map work with that also. Be ready for some assessment in class on this lesson, and we'll see you next time.